Safaddin sort of religion. They were the government. The Caliph, he was like the Pope, if you want to call it that. He was the successor. He had no temporal power to speak of. He was more like a figurehead. So by the 950s, the Abbasid Caliphate had, 960s, had been reduced both in Egypt and even in Iraq to only a figurehead status. So this mythological caliphate that they all want to hark back to is fine. However, they're not very realistic in terms of what the history actually was. They have dreams. They have, they have visions of grandeur, splendor, which reality often gainsays. Not totally, but often does. So that, in the 1000s, new forces were coming from the east. Who originally came from the east? The Persians, all coming into Baghdad, sweeping into Baghdad, taking over. Well, who was pushing the Persians? Well, the Turks were pushing the Persians to go east. Who was pushing the Turks? The Mongols. You have a kind of constant succession of groups pushing one another westward from the east, out of the steppes of Central Asia. I don't know why you had these population explosions there, but you did, and they were very warlike often. They had not lost the ability to survive in a natural state, in a horse-driven society, in a rough and ready kind of military manner. So the Turks in the 1000s were pushing the Persians. And by the end of the 1000s, around 1070 or so, the Turks had taken over Baghdad. But they too kept the caliphate going. This group of Turks that pushed westward at this time were called the Seljuk Turks. They're not the later Turks who were called what? The ones that we hear about in the empire that's so famous. I keep hitching up this belt. I apologize. For you people who've seen me with my belt falling down, it's because this is this weird Italian belt that the more you hitch it up, the more it stretches. So by the end of the day, it's already loose. I bought it from this company in Australia, and I'm really angry at it. That's why I brought the bag, to show my students where it came from. But I can't say, why do you wear it? I like it. I like it. It's a nice belt. I paid $100 for it, and I'm going to keep it, you know. It's a souvenir of my trip to Aussie land. In any event, yes, I feel close to it, even though I think I was taken to the cleaners. All right. So who was the other Turks who we know that you saw at the museum and things of that Turkish group in Istanbul? What are they called, those Turks? You remember? Ottoman Turks. Those are the Ottoman Turks. That's from the Ottoman Empire. That's a later Turkish group from the 1400 period that follows the Seljuks in. But you see, the Turks are coming in now. These are new converts to Islam, funnily enough. They were pretty wild, but at least where the Persians and the Turks go, there was conversions. Now the Shiites, the Persians had been, you know, for somehow reason, felt very comfortable with Shiite Islam. And Shiism, to some extent, expressed their national identity and their nationalism. And so it's the same today, isn't it? We Persians are nothing if not Shiites. It's just part of their national identity. And the Arabs, some Arabs are Shiites in the Iraq area, but the Arabs are not very comfortable or feel very sympathetic towards this Persian sort of activity. There's Persian influence in Lebanon because of the Shiites there. There's Persian influence in Qatar, I think it's Qatar or Bahrain, those places where there's Shiites in the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And of course in southern Iraq, the Shiites outnumber the Sunnis, actually. How this occurred, you'd have to really look into the history carefully, but it's where the Persians who had control in the old days. Shiism somehow was very accommodating with Persian national cultural thing. Well, the Turks, unfortunately for the Persians, Turks and the Persians don't get on. Arabs and Turks don't get on. Turks and Arabs, you know, nobody ever gets. You say, You have to be taught to love. Who do people hate? Well, usually they hate their neighbors. Why do they? Because they know their neighbors. Usually it's hard to hate people you don't know, although some people even do that. But usually, even in your neighborhood, when you're in your home in a residence street, you don't hate the person on the next street. You don't even know who they are. But the guy next to you puts his garbage pails out in front of your house, runs over your weeds, he hoses down his thing and sprays it on your car, makes too much noise at night. You get to dislike that person, at least in your mind, because you know that person. This is unfortunately what happens. If you look all over the world, you'll find that the most hatred in the world is directed against neighbors. I mean, Germans don't like French. French don't like Germans. English don't like Germans. English don't like French. Americans and Canadians have an issue. Mexicans and Americans have an issue. And so on and so on. Japanese and Chinese. Japanese and Koreans. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Everywhere where there are neighbors, there's dislike. You say, why isn't there love? Well, that's not the natural state of mankind, obviously. There's negative feelings developed. So the Persians, and the Arabs never really did see eye to eye and still don't. And that's a lot of what's happening in the Iraq situation at the present time. In any event, the Turks come in. They're another group now that don't see eye to eye with the Persians. When I was young like you and I went across Turkey on trains and hitchhiking and places like that, and I was keeping company sometimes with Persians that were going across Turkey too to go home, I remember standing at the window with a Persian guy. He was very sophisticated. He was studying, I think, in Germany or someplace, and he was looking out the window at the Turks and the railroad stations and saying, donkey people, donkey people. These are all donkey people. And he was a nice fellow, the Persian guy, but he was just expressing the Persian attitude towards the Turks, donkey people. I mean, it's not plus or minus, it's not a nice thing to say, but you feel the animosity there that person felt. And you would never be able to convince that person to be comfortable or feel friendly towards Turks. And I'm sure vice versa, Turks feeling friendly. Look at how the Turks treat the Kurds, very negatively. And so on and so on and so on and so on, and the Turks and the Armenians, and the Turks and the Greeks, and so on and so on. Well, when the Turks came in, they had been converted out in Central Asia by missionaries from the Abbasid area, and Islam made inroads out there, and of course the Russians are still dealing with all the inroads out there, and they came in as Sunnis. The Turks became big champions of Sunnism.